Hello everyone, welcome to a new video series that I'm very excited to introduce, which is Touhou Quest. Today I am playing Touhou 6 Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, but before I get too deep into talking about this game specifically, I thought it'd be good to introduce what Touhou Quest is as a concept. So basically, over the past few years of making shmup content and talking to my fellow players, I've come to realize just how ignorant I am of the Touhou series, especially when it comes to comparing the games to one another, like what is the difference between Touhou 6 and Touhou 8, or Touhou 9 and Touhou 11, all those types of things. I really don't know, and I think that one thing I want to do moving forward is to make more Touhou content along with my arcade content and my indie content. You know, that's just another branch of shmups I want to get into. And so I think the first step is for me to gain more familiarity with the games, and I thought, well, rather than just doing this in isolation on my own or talking to people on Discord, why don't I incorporate this into some content on my channel? So now we have Touhou Quest. The quest being is that I will play through all of the official Touhou games on hard mode and give my impressions initially of how I think about the games, and then when the quest is complete and I have played all of the Touhou games, I will make a final wrap-up, final score video where I give my overall summary of how the games compare to one another now that I have full perspective. So all of these scores that you'll be seeing in these first videos will be my initial impressions, because I don't have the full scope of what Touhou is and what to expect at this point. So things will change as I go along. So if you're an experienced Touhou player and you don't agree with my impressions or my scores, just know that this is because I am just getting familiar, and I definitely plan to amend them and update them as we go along. Another thing about Touhou Quest that I think is going to make it unique is that there are certain aspects of the games that I'm going to be keeping an eye out for and commenting on that you probably don't typically come across. But the reason for is that I want to make a sort of guide for the games at the end. So the first quality I'm keeping an eye out for is cave likeness. Basically, how alike is this Touhou title to a typical cave game, and how different is it from a cave game? And I do think, just from my initial experiences playing Touhou games, that some of them definitely feel more like cave games than others. So that's one of the first metrics I'm going to be talking about, is cave likeness. The other thing I'm really going to be talking about a lot are the graphical presentation aspects of the Touhou games. So how do the bullet patterns look visually? How do they look design-wise? How do the character animations look visually? How is the character design in general? What about the backgrounds? All those types of things. Because I think graphics is an area where Touhou both has some really cool advantages, because there's a lot of really cool creative ways the bullet patterns are produced and all those types of things. And there's other times where the graphics of Touhou really struggle, those being the backgrounds and the character designs. So when I come across Touhou games with strong backgrounds and character designs, I think that's going to be a real standout feature. And then of course I'll talk a little bit about the music. The thing about Touhou music is that it's extremely good. I don't think anyone debates that, and there's much more popularity and interest for the music than the games themselves. So I'm not going to spend too much time or think about this too heavily. Basically all the games have great music for the most part that I'm aware of, and I'll basically pick out my favorite tracks and give my overall impression of the music, but don't take it too seriously, because I am not a Touhou music expert, and this is more about the gameplay, to be honest, and the visuals than it is the music. So with all that said, let's start talking about Touhou 6 Embodiment of Scarlet Devil, my very first foray into Touhou Quest. And I have to say that I had a ton of fun playing this game. A little bit of history about it is that it was released in 2002, and like I said, it is the first Windows game. Shoutouts to Zun for figuring out that putting shmups on Windows and PC is a good idea back in 2002. And I do think that decision alone is probably the main reason why Touhou is as popular as it is, because they continued to be on more esoteric stuff like those computers. I can't remember what computers is on, like PC-98 or whatever. I don't know how, far of a reach it would have. And it even excelled the popularity of arcade, in my opinion, because it was able to get onto an accessible platform much faster. And all my interviews and talking to players over the years, A lot of people say Touhou is how they got into shmups, and especially the Windows era, Touhou, the early Windows era, so games like Touhou 6. So that's a little bit of history about Touhou 6. I don't have a whole lot of in-depth stuff with that, but I do also want to talk a little bit about the basic differences that it has with other Touhous as far as the character selection. So this one has just 2 characters, Reimu and Marissa. I guess they're like the Ken and Ryu of Touhou, it seems. As far as I'm aware, they are in every Touhou game that I've played. And so when I'm also doing these Touhou quests, I'm going to be pointing out which character and which sub-character seems to be the best for survival. These are going to be all survival runs. I'm not going to really dig too deep into the scoring aspects, mostly because I think most people getting into Touhou aren't really worried about that. That's kind of a cool thing about Touhou, is just how much it rewards survival gameplay, and I think, again, another reason why it catches on with a lot of people, whereas arcade games tend to take a little bit more time because they're much more focused on scoring. But anyway, so yeah, this will be mostly just talking about how do you get a survival clear in Touhou the easiest. And so from my expert Touhou advisors, ZPS and friends, I was told that Reimu B is the way to go. I did play Reimu A and got fairly far with her, but the problem with Reimu A was that while her homing amulets are really useful because, you know, you can get around the screen and still hit the boss, the drawback is just they are really low damage, and that really comes to bite you in the butt the later you get in the game on the later boss fights and stuff. And so because of that, it was, you know, decided that Reimu B is the way to go. Marissa is actually a really cool character, but the reason why I don't tend to play her all that much is she's a little bit more technical because she has a narrower shot. And so in order to fully make use of her, you need to know the game a little bit better. You need to know how to stay underneath the bosses. One thing about Touhou that's pretty interesting and unique, even compared to arcade shmups that I've been playing, is when it comes to boss fights, it's kind of like fighting hibachi, basically, where staying underneath the boss and hitting them is a big aspect to the boss fight, whereas in most arcade shmups, the boss is like 2/3 of the screen, so that's usually not as much of an issue. But when you're playing characters, especially Marissa and characters with non-homing shots or with narrower shots, a big challenge of the boss fights isn't just getting around the patterns, it's also maintaining damage on the boss as you do that. That'll come up later in the run. I guess I should make a quick note about this run, I kind of forgot. So this run is played on hard mode. All the Touhou quests will be played on hard mode, and they will all be 1cc's. However, what ended up happening with this run is that I ended up giving myself some extra extends because I was messing around in the options setting, trying to do some rotation stuff, and actually accidentally gave myself some extra extends, and I didn't realize it until I checked chat at the end of the 1cc, and I barely clutched this clear out, so I don't think I would have been able to get it as soon as I did without the extra extends. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, if I play with a few extra extends, you know, that won't be too big of a deal, because this isn't really about me showing off my skills, but I think it's just more fun if it is a 1cc. We'll see as we go along whether I just play on default extends or if I need to give myself some extras, but I will always play on hard mode because I think, you know, the patterns are different there, and so you get a better sense of how the game works in hard mode. I kind of feel like Touhou hard mode is like the arcade difficulty. Basically, normal mode's a little bit too easy to be arcade difficulty, and Lunatic is like its own higher difficulty. So I think most players will probably be playing on hard mode, or I think that's a good introductory skill level for people who have more experience with arcade and that sort of thing. One really cool thing about just Touhou in general is the multiple difficulty options and how well they scale. This right here, I gotta shout out this background. I really liked it. So talking about the backgrounds and visuals of this game specifically, I think overall the early Windows PC games that I've seen, including this one, tend to have pretty lackluster backgrounds. But again, this is the first foray onto the PC, so you do also have to give them some slack, right? But I think the later on you go in this one, the better the backgrounds get. The early stages kind of have meh. And if you're wondering why it begins in stage 3 boss, it's just because I want this video to be more entertaining and accessible, and I think the first 3 stages, you know, there's not a whole lot going on that's all that fun to watch. So again, this isn't just me getting the ones you see, it's also trying to introduce you to the game. So I think jumping to stage 3 boss is a little bit more interesting for the viewers out there. So as far as the bullet patterns and the cave likeness of the bullet patterns, so far I have to say, of all the Touhou games I've played at this point, I feel like this is one of the most cave-like Touhou games. The bullet patterns feel like a lot of stuff that could come out of cave games, maybe later cave games like SDOJ or Esperade or something like that. But that's a massive gap between those two. But something Espegaluda, I guess, is what I was getting at. But at the same time, it doesn't have a whole lot of really Touhou-ish mechanics or gimmicky mechanics compared to, like, there's been Touhou games that I've played where you fly underneath boxes and they are like literal puzzles and stuff like that. The bullet design and the pattern design of this game is much more like something you'll run into with the cave, and that actually I really appreciated it and really enjoyed it. I think the bullet patterns in this game are incredibly fun. That's one we're just fighting right here with the knives coming in from all the directions. I really liked this game a lot and had a ton of fun with these patterns. Some of these were pretty hard to read. The whole slow down mechanic, that's a Touhou staple, but I think it still works really well and is accessible for people who aren't all that familiar with cave. I also one thing I really like about this game that I've played so far is that just how clear and easily distinguishable the hitboxes are on all the bullets. Like those knives and all that sort of thing are pretty easy to get a read on and dodge and visually track. I think Zun has a real talent for doing that with his bullet design. And one thing that I do really appreciate about Touhou that I kind of wish more arcade games would do, honestly, is I do like how he incorporates unique bullet designs that aren't just, you know, colored bits of light. Like he has here these glowing knives, and as the further you get in Touhou, the more ridiculous some of the bullets tend to being. But at this stage, I really like these types of more detailed bullets, but they're still not absolutely ridiculously designed. As far as the survival difficulty, I found this game to be fairly challenging, but definitely not the most challenging Touhou game that I've played so far. So I think among survival, I would give it about a 7 out of 10 difficulty-wise. And here we come into the final stage. Some tracks that I want to highlight as some of my favorites since we're on the final stage were the opening menu theme. I think that was a great track. A track called Stalk the Night. I think that's stage 1. Really enjoyable. Cyrano's theme, and I went through the soundtrack and listened to them, wrote them down. That one's slamming. And Sakuya's theme, and then the overall final stage theme I think is also really cool. One thing that I've noticed with Touhou games that I've played so far, with this one as well, is how he composes the music, where the further you get in the game, the more he kind of starts introducing more like rock and guitar elements into it, makes it a little bit more heavier. And the earlier songs tend to be more kind of light and whimsical. I think that's a really cool kind of staged music progression design that I don't think a lot of shmups do that sort of thing as well as Touhou does. And again, that's probably why Touhou's music is so famous. Reusing the background from before, I do like how he has these sort of 3D scrolling type backgrounds. And here we go on to the moon. I do kind of wish maybe he added a little bit something to this moon background, like maybe a glowing sort of aura, just some animation to it, some small animation. I think just with shmups, still background, like completely static still backgrounds, tend to feel a little bit unfinished or kind of stale in my opinion. So here we go. Now we got the rotating moon background. There we go. He starts picking it up there, so can't complain too much. This pattern is pretty fun to dodge. The spider webs. I've seen a lot of shmups sort of take this design, and I don't know if this is the first Touhou game with this or not, but I've seen this pattern a lot. Like Danmaku Unlimited 3 has this pattern. Space Moth DX has a pattern similar to that. It is interesting how tracking down the DNA of Touhou shot patterns would be a really interesting project in itself, figuring out when was the first time this pattern was ever used in a Touhou game, or was it taken from a cave game or that sort of thing, because the further you get, the more derivative, you know, fan games and stuff to end up being, or other non-Touhou games tend to be, where they take a lot of patterns, like the cat's eye is another kind of famous pattern from Touhou games that ends up in a lot of different things. Even Crimson Clover had one. So I think just stuff like that would be really interesting to check out. This knife pattern here is pretty cool. Look how just... One thing about Touhou 2 that I think he got from specifically Dodonpachi, because I remember this was a actual design point of Dodonpachi, was when they were making Hibachi, they didn't just want to make the patterns, the bullet patterns, difficult visually. They also wanted to make them visually beautiful. And I think Touhou took this to a whole nother level, where it's not only that the patterns are difficult to dodge and stuff like that, but they also have a certain aesthetic beauty to them that is just really engaging and cool. And I think is one reason why Touhou has such strong appeal, even outside people who don't play shmups necessarily, because people can literally visually appreciate how the patterns look. Yeah, I think more shmups have kind of caught on to this in the past. That isn't something you really run into in non-bullet hell shmups for the most part, right? Like old school shmups don't tend to have beautiful bullet patterns or anything like that, but it would be cool to see that taken up in more of the arcade games that we play, and more of the kind of old school style shmups that we play, if they could incorporate some kind of cool visual designs to the bullet patterns themselves. That pattern was a nightmare. So I ended up, oh, I forgot to mention, yeah, here's where I go clutch mode. So when I was doing these runs, I was doing them on Twitch, by the way, I ended up having like 2 or 3 runs that were close to clearing, or maybe 2 runs that was close to clearing. Anyway, I've gotten to literally this final pattern here with just you know, one extend left in the run before, and I was so close to the clear. I think when it came up in the score screen, it was like 99% or something like that, close to the clear. I was just a few moments away, maybe a minute or 2 away, but I got clipped. So this was real clutchness. I felt like this was a real clutch final section here I was going through. So I got clipped there. My resources are definitely running low now, and this pattern, you just couldn't put a lot of damage on it. I've noticed the way the Touhou final bosses tend to work is they sort of lure you into a false sense of security, like, okay, I've got this. And then the final pattern tends to be absolutely long and obnoxious and brutal, and you have to just... It's like, the thing about Touhou patterns that's pretty interesting, that's a little different than Cave, maybe the final attack in DDP is kind of like this, but is that not only are you dodging them, but there's also this sort of endurance factor in Touhou patterns too, where it's not just that they're tricky to dodge and read, it's that they just go on and on and on, and it's a question of how long can you clutch this out, how long can you track these bullets, how long can you rinse and repeat. And I kind of found this area over here in the bottom left. I know I'm not really hitting the guy, but at the same time, this just was a really nice little pocket I was in, and I didn't want to... So you can see me very slowly sort of inching my way out of it, but I didn't want to rush it or anything like that. And so there we go, ended up getting the clear. Had non-default extents, but it still was came down to the wire, sweat and bullets type. The adrenaline was going. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you all enjoyed the very first episode of Touhou Quest. And let me end this by thanking my patrons and asking you to subscribe, get notified, become a patron, all that good stuff. So thank you to Dingo, Andy Cap, Anthony A, Ben Win, Borgie22, Corio, Disco Star Slayer, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB, RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, Malaise, Mark Toms, Martin Worrell, Maz, Meher Calendrian, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Ram Q, Raul, Smacky Factor, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.